Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. I talk about books. Hopefully soon I'll talk about tabletop role-playing game design, which is my job. And I also have actual plays of me playing tabletop games in various playlists below that you can find. Most of my content lately is just books though. And today I'm talking about my next step on the David Mitchell Uber novel, meta novel, whatever you want to call it. It has a few different names apparently. But this is the fourth book that I have read out of 8, and it is Slade House, which is said to be quite a good pairing after the Bone Clocks, and I have to agree. Although people told me it is kind of like a coda somewhat to the Bone Clocks, which to me it made it seem like some of the characters from the Bone Clocks would be reoccurring in this, and there is one character that does, but I would say it's pretty tangentially connected. It does fit nicely with the Bone Clocks afterwards, because what happens in that novel, without spoiling it, has a character and events that spiral nicely into this one. But as others have said, I think you could read Slade House before the Bone Clocks and you'd be okay. It would still have some kind of nice meta contextualization that's happening. But I did like my arc very much, the Thousand Autumns Bone Clocks, and then Slade House with Cloud Atlas being my first book. So far I've played really well together. Slade House is about two twins, Jonah and Nora, although in David Mitchell fashion, we get their story as well as other people's stories through the jumping of time into different chapters, with each chapter being a different person that interacts with Slade House and the twins in different ways. And it's much more than his other books. This is sort of like more situated in genre fiction, being horror or ghost stories in particular. I haven't read the other 4, so I don't mean to say that the other ones might be or may not be genre fiction situated, but out of the ones that I mentioned that I read, this one reads more like genre fiction. And apparently it came out close to Halloween at the time, so it makes sense that the marketing did that and played well with the stories, I'm sure. It's also the shortest David Mitchell book, and I've tabbed it here. I don't know if you could see the coloring too well, but the ones that appear green are actually yellow. The pink ones are devastating plot reveals. Blue, it ties into the Bone Clocks, and orange, it ties into the Thousand Autumns. So it's been fun tabbing things to make sure I remember all the plot reveals, but also to make sure that in the future, if I come back to this book, I can look at how it tied into Bone Clocks or Thousand Autumns. And if I reread it, presumably after reading the other 4, then I could further tab it for the other books and notice more things. So that's kind of fun. So first I'll go without spoilers, and then I'll have to go into spoilers to talk about a David Mitchell book. You pretty much have to spoil it because much of what happens in the plot is spoiler based pretty much. And then I'll go into what it ties into with the meta novel as I understand it anyway. And I could possibly be missing things, but we'll see. And we'll go from there. So this book opens with 2 children who are at Slade House, invited to a party. A ghost supernatural type thing occurs. The meta novel components of this interact with the supernatural components of David Mitchell's books, so know that. Anyway, a ghost story ensues, as all of this story is, and we're left wondering what happened to the kids. But later on, we also kind of are put in a position where we're not sure if they are victims or if they are sort of taken into they have more agency than victimhood would have us believe, basically. And we get an interesting tie-in again, without spoilers. There's a character who ties into the Bone Clocks. Ed Brubeck is a Spyglass magazine person, and I think all of the books have some mention of Spyglass magazine, even if it is not a specific person that works for it, as this character and the one in Bone Clocks did. So there's some non-spoiler tie-in there, and there's also mention of the Fox and the Hound pub, which appears in many of the stories as far as I can tell. Not in the Thousand Autumns, of course, because that takes place in Japan, but Bone Clocks has it, and I believe Cloud Atlas had it at least once. I think he's quite good at slipping in and out of voices, and this, I think, does it better than some of the others because it's so short and sweet. So even if you don't particularly get on with a person in this, since it's only 230 some odd pages, wait 40 pages and you're done. And each story I thought nicely built onto the last, and just when the sort of structure gets a little bit annoying with the ghost house and the repeated hauntings and what's going on with that specific Slade House, as soon as it gets a little grating and a little bit annoying, it switches it up. So that was very pleasant, and I have to say it did get me with one of the stories in particular where there's like a switcheroo that you don't really see coming, and that too was also really satisfying. I gave this 4 stars, and it nicely built from 3 stars to 4 stars for me. It, in the beginning, was just sort of felt like genre fiction that was sort of being recycled. It wasn't really doing anything new. And then he has the switcheroo happen, and then he introduces the meta components, and those two things really give it its own particular flavor that makes it so nice. So now I'm going to talk about spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, I suggest skipping this and coming back until you have, or if you don't care, then continue watching. But essentially what we find out is that Nora and Jonah are actually the ones with agency. They're controlling the house. The house is a machine of some kind. There's some very particular vernacular, but essentially what they can use the house for is preserve their bodies that they had placed in it in 1932, I think it was. So their bodies are just in a stasis, essentially. And they can, every 9 years, materialize Slade House, which otherwise doesn't really exist in the fiction otherwise, as far as we can tell. And they have to lure a victim willingly, which, if you have read the Bone Clocks, this is why it ties in quite nicely with the Bone Clocks. They have to get this person to eat or drink something in particular that severs their soul umbilical cord, basically, and then the twins can materialize and eat the soul. So it is a antiquated form, it is revealed, of what carnivores in the Bone Clocks were doing. And because they're locked in that stasis loop of the 9 years, it is brought to light that is quite an antiquated form of it, just like in the Thousand Autumns. So that's why the arc kind of feels pretty great with Thousand Autumns Bone Clocks. You could reverse Bone Clocks and Slade House and still get the same stuff, but I think the Bone Clocks reveal of these things is a little bit more pronounced and a little bit more articulated, because there's just more page count, and there's an entire chapter devoted to it. That is the longest chapter in the book. So if you like the meta components being added into it, then that's you know, far superior in the Bone Clocks as far as I'm concerned. We find out that the twins are able to generate a very complex illusion in order to do this. So as soon as the people go into Slade House, there's a complex fiction that is enabled, which is how they trick people into imbibing this substance. Sometimes there's a Halloween party and they're drinking the alcohol. Sometimes they are having a conversation with an individual and eat something. There's a lot of different scenarios where they try to trick people, and it's kind of interesting actually how nuanced and eclectic they get at doing this. But just as I said, structure kind of gets played out where you're like, oh yeah, another person's gonna get tricked. Oh yeah, okay, we'll see what happens. but it flips on its head a little bit, and the creativity of which they're able to generate their illusion plays into the reader generating the fiction in their own mind from reading the book. So it's really fun. I quite liked it. And at the end, we get a visit from Marinus, who is in the Bone Clocks, and sort of the main horologist, who is a person who is atemporal. They meaning they cannot die unless a carnivore specifically kills them in a certain way, which the Bone Clocks goes into. Otherwise, they are put into the rebirth cycle, where it's every 39 years they're reborn again anyway. And the horologists make it their business to find carnivores who are preying on these types of people and then killing them. And the twins' downfall is that they actually try to court Marinus as a victim, and then the tables are sort of turned on their head, and all of this stuff is revealed about it. How it ties into Thousand Autumns even further is that the girl, Nora, has said that... So one thing I should explain as well is during this 9-year cycle, when they don't have to specifically be in the house, they are kind of like the horologists, where they can astral project anywhere in the world and subsume the consciousness of a person in the real world and sort of live vicariously through them, just like that. They have a very pronounced gift in suasion, is what the Bone Clocks called it. So they're able to essentially dwell in a person for as long as they need. Presumably only up to the 9 years, because after the 9 years, the house needs to eat to continue its machinery, its machinations, and otherwise they would perish, not having the substance to fuel their little stasis effects of their bodies. Nora, it is said, has occupied a body in Japan, and there's allusions to the great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather of Thousand Autumns. There is a abbot in it called Inomoto who is murdered, who we find out is being also possessed by a horologist who suasions the magistrate in order to kill the abbot. And this abbot is apparently survived by a child who has followed in the footsteps of the shaded ways, what it's called when these carnivores are consuming these souls in order to generate a long-lived life. So basically it sets up, maybe another villain. It at least tells Marinus that more is going on with that stuff. And also Marinus, it is alluded to, has found the Shaik, I think it's called, the master that taught Jonah and Nora as they were traveling before they entered Slade House, amongst a lot of different countries in the world, trying to imbibe as much mysticism and all these different dark arts, black arts, whatever you want to call them, to get to the point where they are able to construct Slade House and live forever and do their antiquated form of what they do. And so we don't know if Marinus has taken out Inomoto's great-grandkid or whatever, but we do know some of the other masters of Jonah and Nora has been taken out by Marinus. So maybe some other short stories or another book or something like that, we'll be able to see Marinus doing that, which I think would be quite cool. And we also learn a little bit of backstory on Nora and Jonah, is that we get their full backstory. An entire chapter is pretty much dedicated to that. And basically the only things that at least super stood out to me when that was happening was that they are tapping into a whole bunch of different types of religion and mysticism and stuff like that. It is not, he makes a point, David Mitchell, to not make it just Orientalism, and they're sort of taking all these different techniques from every hemisphere, every culture, all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of nice. You usually see mysticism as co-opting of culture from usually India and Orientalism in general, which is bad. So it's nice that he's aware of that and steered clear of it. The next book that I'll be reading is going to be Black Swan Green, and I'm doing that because in the Bone Clocks, Hugo Lamb is mentioned as a character in Black Swan Green, which is ostensibly a town in England. And so I wondered if I should just revert to chronological order and proceed, but I usually have a great deal of success and satisfaction in picking my books emergently, and so the exact naming of Black Swan Green in it felt like a call out to me that I should take up. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I am sticking to not knowing anything about any of the books. I don't like reading blurbs and reviews and things like that. I'd rather just be surprised. If you've read the David Mitchell Uber novel, then let me know what your trajectory was. If it was satisfying, don't put comments that are spoilers without marking them, please. And if you have any questions about this particular book, if I didn't satisfyingly answer a particular thing or went off at a tangent and then lost it, then just let me know. And if you have a particular book that you would recommend of the 4 that I haven't read, also put that down, because I don't want to get hit with a slump with these and then sort of tail off, especially since I'm filming a series of this and I can't really stop. So it'd be nice to hit satisfying after satisfying mark with it. So I'll see you next time for Black Swan Green. Have a good one. Bye.